Welcome to the Geneva Center for Security Policy. My name is Jean-Marc Rickley. I'm a head of Global Risk and Resilience here at GCSP, and it's my pleasure to welcome a very distinguished panel to talk about a topic that is very important, but unfortunately not very well covered in the West, which is the war in Yemen. I was recently speaking to a prominent journalist of a very famous and serious francophone newspaper, and we're talking about Yemen, and he was telling me that he wanted to write about it. The problem was that each time he had an article on Yemen, Yemen got the lowest score in terms of hits, and so there was some pressure from his boss to actually not to publish too many articles on Yemen because it basically doesn't attract readership. So and it's a very unfortunate situation because the situation in Yemen is probably the worst humanitarian catastrophe that is currently going on, with 24 million people needing assistance. And so on the 26th of March, I think, of this month, we will enter the 5th year of this conflict. And it's really time to try to think about ways out to support people that are promoting a peaceful approach to this conflict. So today we'll talk about Yemen and the prospect for peace, especially after the Stockholm agreement that happened last December. You might have read that Jeremy Hunt, British foreign minister, was on a tour in the Middle East, was the first official of a Western country to go to Yemen in the last 5 years to try to unlock the situation. Stockholm raised a lot of hopes, but it looks like the situation is deadlocked. So we'll try in this panel to discuss about this issue. So the way it will run, each speaker will have about 10 minutes to provide their perspective on Yemen, and then we will open the floor for question and answer. I like to start by introducing the first speaker, Dr. Mahmoud Al-Azani. He's an academic, politician, and human rights advocate. He's also the president of Tamadoun Foundation in the UK, as well as a member of the executive committee of ILPHR, NGO based in Geneva. Dr. Al-Azani, you have the floor to set the context and set the scene. Thank you.
Can you hear me now? It's good afternoon now. I welcome you all. Thank you for giving me this start. I'll try to be as fast as possible. I will try to stick to my 10 minutes allowance. I will try to set the scene for the whole situation, but you know it's difficult to set the scene for 10 minutes. If I miss anything, please do not hesitate to ask after we finish the first part of this session. During the crisis in Yemen, we have witnessed significant shifts to the dynamics of international politics in response to both internal pressures and changing realities on the ground. Notably, we can observe three distinct patterns at three different stages. At the eve of the military coup, suspicious silence on the during the capture of Sana'a by Houthi militias. The second stage, it's an equivocal condemnation for the military coup and support for the war to restore the legitimate government. That was following the spread of rebels to the rest of the country. After 4 years of war and several rounds of peace negotiations, mounting pressure to end the war. The question is, what had driven these changes? If we observe them one by one, we can come to a widely accepted explanation among political observers and commentators. The political environment during the first stage, which I marked at the beginning as the suspicious silence on the capture of Sana'a, the political environment during the first stage was largely dominated by the following significant events. On the positive side, it was the completion of the Yemeni national dialogue in which all conflicting parties took part under observation and supervision of the UN, regional and international communities. On the negative side, it was the failure to complete the political transition following the demise of Saleh regime and amid growing concerns of regional community about the rise of Islamist groups to power as an outcome of the Arab Spring. This was associated with the proliferation of terrorist attacks against security forces and government targets. Externally, it was the reverse tide of the Arab Spring, which was signaled by the collapse of Muslim Brotherhood Authority in Egypt. But the most significant international event at that time was the signing up of the nuclear deal between Iran and the Western powers. The underlying assumptions for this silence during this particular period, dominated by those events, the assumptions were that this was a sign of a muted acceptance for the new status quo and for the toppling of the Yemeni government, which was dominated then by Islamist parties, due to their failure to create a successful model and due to their reluctance to combat terrorist activities. On the other hand, in this particular juncture, because of the divide in the Yemeni military, Houthi militia were allowed to play this role. They were allowed to topple the government under the initial impression by the key players that they could be those new arrivals, they could be more effective allies in fighting Al-Qaeda-linked terrorist activities. Externally, this was seen as an encouraging gesture to Iranians to give up their nuclear ambitions in return for allowing them the expansion of their regional influence through allied militias. Later, the mode quickly shifted because of the sudden shift in the behavior of Houthi militias. Shortly after strengthening their grip on the capital Sana'a, they exceeded the remit accepted then to the major players. Instead of fighting Al-Qaeda, they threw the whole country into a full-scale civil war in order to enforce their control. They reached Aden, Taiz, and most importantly, Bab al-Mandab Strait. They also began operating intensive flights between Sana'a and Tehran, notably with no passengers, but likely carrying some other shipments. They also began rattling the cage alongside the Yemeni-Saudi border. The whole situation became alarming at all levels, nationally, regionally, and internationally. By then, condemnation started to grow up, and support to end the military coup was started to come into shape. The task for this was assigned the newly formed Arab coalition. This was also backed by the 2216 UN Security Council resolution. Now, after 4 years of war, the landscape has changed completely. Let's go again. 4 years of gun. Let's go again and look what has changed internally and internationally, and try to match it with the early stages of this situation. Internally, Houthis' control has shrunk to 25% of the country. Government forces were 3 miles away from the seaport of Hudaidah. The Houthi killed their ally, Ali Abdullah Saleh, and that stripped them of the political cover that they had before. And they become apparent like it's just only another sectarian group trying to control the country. Fourth, and the most important, that alarmed the whole international community, with the aggravated humanitarian situation. Looking to the external factors, 4 rounds of peace negotiation ended in repeated failure. But there were notably dwindling support for the Arab coalition from their Western allies. The withdrawal of US from Iranian deal. This has culminated in mounting pressure internationally to end the war and create the momentum to push for the Hudaidah agreement. But this pressure, however, is mainly focused on one side, which is the legitimate government and Arab alliance. And it's apparently linear with Houthis and Iran. These differences exist between countries and within each country in the West. But if you look at the map of these differences, different attitude on this matter still more reflective to the differences of the major players on the Iranian nuclear deal, but not what's really needed to achieve peace in Yemen. Conclusions. The whole approach to peace by the international community was designed to deal with the outcomes of a military coup, which is largely influenced by external factors instead of internal drivers and complexities. This assessment needs to be revisited, and the whole new approach is needed sooner than later. What happened in Yemen, according to our reading, was more than internal coup, was more than military coup. Peace between warring camps cannot be achieved when both sides can be achieved only when both sides can reach a common ground on which they can build future. This seems to be difficult, if impossible, to achieve, because of the two main camps hold completely different motivations, goals, and irreconcilable values. On the government side, despite the loose coalition it represents, they still hold to the vision set by the outcome of the Yemeni national dialogue for rebuilding a modern democratic state. However, on the Houthi side, they aspire to the Iranian model of theocracy driven by sectarian views and social standing and values. It is difficult to reconcile democracy with theocracy. It is difficult to reconcile equality with religious-based discriminations and claims to supremacy based on divine rights. Finally, Yemen needs to reconcile with itself, with its neighbors, and with the rest of the world. And this cannot be achieved by accepting the military endeavors of religious zealotry, regardless of their aspiration for wilaya or khilafah. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Al-Azani, for setting the stage for presenting the complexity of this conflict that have to do with external and domestic dynamics. And I think we'll revisit this assumption that maybe more effort has been put on the external dynamics than the internal. So let's move now to our second speaker, Dr. Hamdan Damag. He's a researcher, a writer, and a prize-winning novelist. Dr. Damag also holds the post of Deputy Rector of Yemeni Center for Studies and Research in Sana'a in Yemen, and is a Vice President of the International League for Peace and Human Rights, a co-organizer of this event, and General Secretary of the Tamadun Foundation. Dr. Damag, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for introducing me. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for coming. I'll be talking about some of the aspects of the Yemeni conflict, and I usually refer to them as hidden aspects because they have been notably ignored, or at least not taken seriously enough by different key players involved in brokering the peace process in Yemen. I'll try to demonstrate how such aspects constitute a real obstacle to the ongoing peace efforts and how they may partly explain the existing stalemate. So I'll focus on three main issues. The first one is the question of terrorism, or more precisely, whether the Houthi movement, also known as Ansar Allah, can be classified as a terrorist organization similar to other Ansar organizations like Ansar al-Sharia, Ansar al-Din, Ansar al-Sunnah, or even similar to its Shia Allah, Hezbollah, which has been listed last week as a terrorist organization by the UK. It's worth remembering that the UK itself in the past has classified the Yemeni-based group Aden Abiyan Islamic Army as a terrorist organization after they kidnapped 16 foreign tourists in December 1998 in Abiyan, 4 of whom were killed during the rescue operation by the government at that time. Considering the common definition of terrorism, many opponents of Houthis argue that the movement has committed unprecedented act of terrorism during the 4-year conflict. And there is no reason not to classify it as a terrorist group, particularly by the international key players such as the UN, the UK, the USA, and the EU. In 2017, the Yemeni government requested that the Security Council recognize the Houthis as a terrorist group. However, this seemed at that time to be merely a means of applying pressure on the movement. Almost 4 months ago, the USA reportedly considered designating the Houthis as a terrorist organization, which deemed to be by many observers as a means to apply further pressure on Iran. Due to the unclear stance of the international community and key players on this issue, there is a growing concern among many Yemenis that the classification of terrorist organizations is rather politicized and that the key players have different agendas or double standards in this matter. The ambiguity of such a stance has devastating consequences on the Yemeni people's trust in the international community regarding the fight against terrorism. More importantly, their concern is that such ambiguity sends a wrong message to other military groups, whether religious or political, both in Yemen or in the region, to use violence and terrorism as an effective means to achieve their goals and receive international recognition. This includes the already existing terrorist groups such as Al-Qaeda or Daesh. The second aspect that I would like to talk about is the racial discrimination and its damaging consequences on the Yemeni social fabric. Actually, racism has been always a sensitive issue that Yemenis and others have tried to avoid talking about openly. Nevertheless, during the last 4 years, we have witnessed an alarming increase of its manifestation in the current conflict. Again, Houthis are to be blamed for initiating such dangerous social sentiment. Evidently, the Houthis are a supremacist group who believe in their right to rule, not according to the Yemeni constitution or democracy, but rather according to some theological and mythical claims driven by the divine right. The divine right to exclusive to the descendant of the Prophet Muhammad, a minority in the Yemeni society also known as Ahl al-Bayt. Such claim for power based on blood supremacy is well embedded in the doctrine and documents of the Houthi movement, and indeed evident in its political and social practices since it's captured the capital city of Sana'a in September 2014. In fact, Houthis nowadays show no hesitation to assert that Ahl al-Bayt have and must have several privileges over other citizens in the society, including political, social, and financial privileges, which obviously undermine the basic principle of equal citizenship. Furthermore, Houthis have proven to be an extreme anti-Semitic group. This is evident not only from their infamous chant, "Curse open the Jews," which forms part of their official slogan, but also from the series of actions committed against the remaining of the Yemeni Jewish community from 2007 until 2017. And as expected, racism by Houthis has provoked a kind of reverse racism, which has started to make itself visible day after day. And sooner or later, it will gain momentum and become a mainstream problem if the issue of racism remains ignored and untackled. The negative consequences of all this on the social fabric and on any reconciliation efforts in the future is rather obvious. The third aspect that I would like to highlight is the empowerment of armed non-state actors in the liberated regions, which has greatly weakened the position of the legitimate government and the law enforcement bodies. Since the liberation of Eden in July 2015, a number of regional-based militias in the south of Yemen have been formed, such as the security belt forces, the local elite forces, and others. Despite being theoretically affiliated with the legitimate government, these militias operate largely outside the government control, as stated by the UN Panel of Experts report. The pro-secessionist Southern Transitional Council has also established its military wing and acts as a de facto government in Eden. The existence and growing of armed non-state actors is a fundamental problem and definitely has many negative consequences on the stability of the country and the legitimacy of Hadi government, which over the last 4 years has struggled to show a successful model of good governance and to meet the basic needs and services in the areas under its control. So in conclusion, peace, as we all know, it's a hard and challenging process. And to achieve peace, we must understand the complexity of the crisis, identify its causes, addressing all its different aspects, and deal with them accordingly. It is also important to recognize that the interest and aspiration of the Yemeni people for freedoms, democracy, rule of law and order, equal citizenship, and stability are all at the core of the current crisis, and that for any feasible solution to end the war and to make a sustainable peace, it must take them under consideration. Otherwise, all regional and international efforts to make peace in Yemen will go in vain. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Damak. Thank you for providing us a perspective that looks more at internal dynamics. You mentioned terrorism, racial discrimination, and the empowerment of non-state actors. Probably you forgot a few others when we talk about terrorism. You didn't mention much about Al-Qaeda. I think that's from the Western perspective. This is a very important problem. You mentioned the problem of the Southern Transitional Council, the potential of a spillover effect it could have for secessionist movements, and these are issues that we will probably return to in the Q&A. Now we'll talk about a subject that is very important as well, is the issue of gender, and we have a very distinguished speaker, Madame Orya Mansour. He's a human rights activist and former Minister of Human Rights in Yemen. After the Yemen Spring in 2001, she was a spokesperson for the National Council for Peaceful Revolutionary Forces in Yemen and a chair of the Women National Committee for more than 10 years. Madame Mansour left the country after the coup in 2014 and currently works as a consultant on transitional justices and other work related to integration of refugees in Germany. Madame, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for all also to be here with us today to hear us as Yemenis, what is going on in Yemen, what we are looking forward for the future of Yemen. I will take the things from other perspective, from the side of gender, from the side of women and how women has been affected severely from this war, from this conflict, what is going on in Yemen. And also, I'm not just speaking about the Yemeni women as victims of this war or this conflict, also about their role, how they are positive, what they are doing now in Yemen, and their role to push up for peace, because this is also, I feel this is our responsibility to do something to push up for the future. We are, of course, in very catastrophic problem, but anyway, we want to get rid of the war and to rebuild our country. First of all, I would like to tell you that the women's rights in Yemen, it was before 2011, before the revolution, before the uprising, it was also not good, or we had many problems. We lived in very conservative society. I was chairperson for the Women National Committee more than 10 years, and all the time we had confrontation and we have problem, especially with this very conservative. For example, we wanted to change the personal status law, the minimum age of marriage in the personal status law. It is not there. That's why child marriage, it was widely happening in Yemen, because it is under 15 also. Sometimes when the girl child is 11 years or 12 years old, the fathers, the guardians, they get her married. Women should take the permission of the male or her husband when even she wanted to go to visit her family. Yes, this law really, it is totally against human rights. By the way, Yemen also was the first in the Arab world signed CEDAW, the Convention to Eliminate All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. That was in 1982. And that was in the southern part of Yemen. We were two countries. Then in 1990, we had unity. We had done some achievement for the women in the southern part of Yemen. We were British colony, women well educated before the unification. After the unification, many things were, especially for the women, and women's rights was collapsed. They wanted also to withdraw from this convention that time, the parliament, after the unification, but anyway, it was very difficult for them to draw from international standard or from international convention. So that was the situation before 2011. But in 2011, you will be surprised when I will tell you that thousands of women, they were in the street. They were involved. They were leader for this revolution. You have heard about some names in Yemen, about some women. They were in the front line of this revolution. They were leader for this revolution, not just in the capital city, Sana'a, but also in the other governorates, in Aden, in Taiz, in different governorates. Women, they were there, and they are raising, or they are climbing not just for their right as women, they are climbing for the right of the society. Our goal in this revolution to have civic state. We want the state to guarantee our rights. We want equal rights, men and women. Our dignity to be guaranteed also. That was also surprising for us in the Women National Committee, and because during you will not find many women who wanted to be involved in the politics because they think that politics is a risk for them, and they try to avoid to be involved in the politics. But in 2000 and after 2000, they were active, very active. Then they have played a very vital role in the national dialogue. We had national dialogue conference, and this dialogue lasted 10 months. All groups, they were there, all different political tribes, women. We asked for a quota, 30% for minimum, 30%. And we have approached from this quota. It was not 30, it was 29, but anyway, that is wonderful. Women, they were there, especially the young women. We have professors from different universities, they were there. Grassroots women leading NGOs, also they were involved. And they were in the different groups. It is not just about women. We have, for example, a group, they have discussed the transitional justice. We have group, they have discussed the rebuilding of the state and the constitution, what the new constitution should be included. So then from the outcomes of the national dialogue, we had draft of the constitution. Women also, they were represented in the draft committee. 3 women out of 11. And we were very proud, we were very happy that our right and the right of every citizen, it is in this constitution, in the draft of the constitution. Not yet, it was not approved, but just it was a proposal. After the COP in September 2014, everything collapsed. It stopped everything. If I speak about the situation of the women now and from the humanitarian perspective, it is a real disaster. Before it was a disaster, but now it is much more. The mortality rate of the women, it was 500 per 100,000, and this is the highest rate in the region, and of course in the world. That is very high figure. And you know, because of the war, many of the men, they are in the front line. They are the women, they become breadwinner. They are also feeding their families in the situation when also there is no job opportunities. There is the private sector collapsed. The economy in large, it was collapsed in the country. So there is no job opportunities for the women. The women in the rural areas, they don't have too much to do. But anyway, they try to save their children. There is aid agencies, and some women also, they lead some grassroots or base community organization. They are trying to help, to support. For example, we have one lady, she is in our coalition. We have some coalitions. We have also some initiatives. That is the women establishing themselves, the women reforming themselves in groups to do something for the country, to do something for their families, to do some, for us. So, for example, we have one in our coalition, Women Solidarity. She is, she convinced some private sector to launch often for bakery, and they give bread for the very poor people for free, for the children, for the women, for the families. Yeah. really, they don't have any fund. They are underfunded. They are lack, or they have no access to resources. But anyway, they are doing their best to do something to save the people. The time, okay. But anyway, yeah. That is what we are doing. Also, we were involved, for example, in Stockholm. We push up, we make, we advocate, we make all parties under our pressure that they have to give up the weapons, they have to give up the arms, and they have to go to the peace. In this way, just we can save our country. Other way, if the war, if the conflict continue, I think this is a disaster for us. Now we lost the future also of our children. Many schools are destroyed. More than 30% of the school, it is occupied by the militias. It is occupied also by the IDPs. These people who lost their places to stay, they go to and occupy the schools. Many children, they are out of the schools because also of security reason. Many ways it is not safe for the children to go to the schools. So peace, it's a must for us, and this is our responsibility. We have agenda really, and we have sent this agenda, women agenda, to the Security Council. We have sent this agenda to all parties. We have sent this agenda to the coalition, to the Arab coalition, to all of them, that we need the peace. We are in very bad need for the peace, and we are doing something. As women, we are disarmed all the time, but we are pushing up for the peace. Yeah. If they have any question.
Thank you very much, Madam Mansour, sorry. You talk about a very important issue that probably is a characteristic of modern conflicts, and we can see the same dynamics going on in Syria and elsewhere, which is the fundamental role of women as a breadwinner, as well as the issue of education and how do you rebuild a society from ashes. And I think that we should talk more about that in the Q&A. And now we haven't talked much about the elephant in the room, which is external actors and Iran, and probably this will be one of the focus of the fourth speaker, Mr. Ahmed Qureshi. He's a journalist, author, and television personality with extensive experience in Pakistan, Gulf, and the MENA region. Public diplomacy expert, he was one of the designer of the U.S. State Department post 9/11 outreach program for the Islamic world in 2002 and 2003, and a communication strategy for Musharraf government in Pakistan from 2004 and 2008. He leads policy research project for a private research group into Yemen and other Middle East conflicts for the impact on Pakistan policy options. Mr. Qureshi, you have the floor.
So thank you, Dr. Rickley. I bring to you the perspective of a journalist and a researcher with some, I would say, reasonable level of access to some of the key players in this conflict. And I would like to start, first of all, at the outset, just by telling you why this Yemen conflict has really changed the dynamics of politics in our region. We've had many conflicts over the last 18, 19 years in the region. We have Iraq, we have Syria, we have, of course, Afghanistan, and we've seen Libya, and we've seen Egypt. But Yemen is different somehow. And the reason for Yemen being different, probably, of course, there are many reasons. But one of the key reasons is, in addition to the fact that we have this huge humanitarian tragedy in Yemen, the famine, in addition to that, Yemen conflict poses the most immediate threat to the stability of the only surviving models of stability and human development in the region, and that is the Gulf region. Now you have these, the models developed in the United Arab Emirates, Dubai, Abu Dhabi, and then you have Qatar, you have Bahrain, you have, of course, now Saudi Arabia trying to reshape and reimagine itself. And Yemen, the conflict, if it expands, it poses a threat to these last surviving models of stability and human development. With of course, the larger models in the region all in a state of limbo. Iraq and Syria and Egypt, Libya, these are the countries that used to, at some point, lead the civilizational, I would say, direction in this region, but no more with the collapse of the state. So basically, it is the Gulf region that is somehow anchoring the prospects of future peace or development and human development, although all the political models in the Gulf region are monarchies. But if you overlook just this one fact and focus on the opportunities that this region provides to the people in the wider region, in the Middle East, in Asia, with the huge workforces in the Gulf region. So Yemen assumes lots of importance, and that is one of the key reasons why you have Saudi Arabia and other Gulf countries very keen to be involved in this conflict, and not just the Gulf countries, but also countries afar. I mean, at one point we've had at least, I would say, a dozen countries that are geographically far away from Yemen, maybe not impacted by what's going on in Yemen, but were nevertheless involved because of these far-reaching impact on the Gulf region, on the energy routes, and the intertwined interests of, for example, Morocco at one point, Turkey at one point was involved, maybe not now. Pakistan, for example, was, although not involved directly in the conflict, but politically supporting the legitimate Yemeni government. Egypt. So Yemen is really different. And now the conflict has become intractable. It's quite obvious. It's almost unmanageable from the perspective of, if I'm a journalist or a researcher, it's really, I don't know how to follow. I mean, it's just, you can't follow where this conflict is going. It's so intractable, so unmanageable, and has become so chaotic. And one of the key observations you get from this conflict when you study it is how the international community is failing to take decisive action. It's one of those conflicts where the international community somehow, for some reason, is unable or unwilling to take decisive action. And Yemen, finally, the last important thing is that Yemen has become intertwined. I know the whole focus right now is on the humanitarian crisis and on Stockholm and the peace process and the UN processes. But the fact is, Yemen is deeply intertwined with several other things. Number one, deeply intertwined and linked to the EU-US tussle over the Iran nuclear deal. So Yemen has a lot to do with the EU-US dynamic. Yemen has a lot to do with the nuclear deal itself. Yemen has a lot to do with the role of Iran and the future role of Iran and where Iran is headed for. All these things come together and make Yemen one of the worst crises, frankly. I mean, it's a nightmare for everyone who is involved in it. So I'll just very quickly two more points I would like to tackle before I conclude, and I feel those two are really very important. Is the indecisiveness of the international community, and this is a key point. For some reason, the international community is dealing with this militia that has taken over the capital of Yemen with kid gloves. Very soft approach to the Houthi militias, and this indecisiveness is very visible. You cannot ignore it. Just a couple of months ago, in January, the panel of experts submitted a report to the UN Security Council, and they had they raised some serious issues. For example, they raised one issue. One of the issues that they raised was Houthis using or acquiring and using anti-ship missiles and targeting oil tankers and scaring away aid ships and increasing the cost for aid groups and countries to send aid into Yemen, because that increases the cost for insurance companies and so forth. So aid groups are now reluctant to send ships. Oil tankers now under threat. Houthis get hold of these anti-ship missiles. Not only that, but the report of the panel of experts notes as well that beginning in August 2018, the Houthis have gotten hold of improved versions of unmanned vehicles. And now they can actually mount attacks deep into the Arabian Peninsula, specifically, of course, their main targets being Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates being, of course, directly involved in the conflict on the other side. So despite all the attention by the international community, despite the involvement of the UN Security Council, decisiveness is not there. One of the things that a lot of people expected after this report by the panel of experts is for the UN or for the Security Council to sanction either the entire Houthi militia or if not, then at least individuals who are involved or suspected to be involved in the procurement of these new types of weaponry, anti-ship missiles or improved versions of unmanned drones. But that is not happening. You don't even see a discussion on that. It's not even moving in that direction, which of course gives a clear signal to the Houthis to basically continue doing what they're doing and with complete impunity. So that's one of the things that's really disturbing. And of course, you don't see anybody even reprimanding the Houthis on delaying peace talks. They can, if they choose, not attend, or attend when they want, or attend half of the session and leave, engage or not engage. They do it at their own will, and there is no cost on the Houthis when they do any of these things. So, and it all comes down to the international community being really very soft on the Houthis when it comes to this. So these are very important observations, and I conclude with two more points, and those happen to be increasing. There's a trend, it's quite obvious. The international community wants to increase the cost on the key players involved in the war. The main player, of course, is the Arab coalition. And the international community has increased the cost on the Arab coalition through increased media coverage, reprimanding the coalition on its there are many failures of the coalition itself with regards to, for example, some of the instances where they attacked or indirectly killed civilians. But the international community is being very selective. Where the international community increases the cost on the Arab coalition, the UN, the Security Council, P5 countries are not ready to recognize the elephant in the room, and that is Iran as well. The cost for the key players in the war needs to be increased for all the key players if you want to really reach a point where you can convince everybody to step back and give peace a chance. Interestingly, Iran gets to use Yemen as a bargaining chip in its negotiations, indirect with the United States. Of course, there are no negotiations right now, but whatever back-channel contacts are there, Yemen is actually a bargaining chip. You know, if there's a progress on Iran nuclear deal, if there's progress on sanctions, maybe, you know, the Houthis would go and engage. But if there's not, well, Houthis will not, and there'll be delay. Then there'll be cost for everybody. Of course, the EU-US tussle is also a huge problem. One of the key reasons for the paralysis in Yemen and the stalemate is the fact that the international actors really are busy, or let's say they know that Yemen is linked to Iran, to US, to Iran nuclear deal and progress in all of those areas. And without progress in those areas, Yemen would not move forward, the peace talks would not move. and the Houthis would not engage properly because they would not get the green signal from the key power that is supporting the Houthis, external power. And Yemen would continue to be, what it is today. So basically, one of the things that the international community needs to do right now is increase the cost for all the key players involved. And Saudi Arabia, Arab Coalition, the UAE have been recognized as key players. The cost has been increased for them to be involved in this war, but it needs to be also increased for the Houthis themselves. They need to be sanctioned. They need to be rewarded if they make progress in attending the peace talks, in being proactive and positive. And they need to be reprimanded, and that there need to be consequences if they fail to engage, if they fail to appear or show up at peace talks, if they unnecessarily delay peace talks. There needs to be a cost for the Houthis, and there needs to be a cost also for Iran. Iran also needs to be recognized as a key player in this conflict. Of course, there's a debate. Of course, I've spoken to lots of friends in Tehran, and they say, journalists and researchers, and they say basically, we speak to our government people, and they say, well, we're not involved. Iran is not directly involved, is not directly supporting the Houthis, but of course the evidence on the other side with the Security Council itself is overwhelming. The meetings between Ansarullah, the Houthis, and Hezbollah in Lebanon, there are plenty of circumstantial evidence that links all of these players together. So I conclude just simply by saying that we need to increase the cost on all the key players, on Houthis, on the Arab coalition, but also on Iran. We need to recognize that there will be no progress in Yemen unless there's also progress on Iran nuclear deal. There's also progress or some sort of understanding between the Americans and the EU on how to move forward. Should the United States and the EU allow the Houthis, or maybe allow Iran to use Yemen as a bargaining chip? Should Yemen be a bargaining chip, or should progress in Yemen be separate from whatever mess that we have over the Iran nuclear deal and the other track, the U.S. sanctions on Iran? I think as the international community, we need to be very clear. We need to de-link Yemen from the Iran nuclear deal. We need to de-link Yemen from whatever tussle the EU and the US have. And we need to increase the costs on everybody, not be selective, not just the Arab coalition. You need to also increase the cost on the Houthis and also on Iran. And maybe only then we might be able to break the stalemate that we see right now in Yemen. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you very much. And I think the message was quite clear. So the prospect for you have to do with increasing the cost for all actors, especially the Houthis and Iran, and also trying to dealing, as you said, a different issue with Iran. May I just ask three other speakers, because the title of this panel discussion is about towards a feasible peace and prospects for a peace in Yemen. And I haven't heard properly what would be for you the priority. What would be the priority to invest in order to see a feasible peace in Yemen? Can you just come in 2 minutes, and then I open the floor for questions. Dr. Al-Azani?
For me, given the stalemate in the existing situation, whether in the military front or in the negotiation front, there is a prospect to do something in the to actually without any underestimating for all the conclusions that we made about the complexity of the situation, but there is a great chance to focus on those areas which are already outside of Houthi control. For example, providing successful model there, bringing back state actors at the expense of non-state actors, providing the services, improving the security situation, resuming the education activities, courts, the rule of law. There is a great chance to do this. And those things cannot wait. If we say that now about 75% of the territory is outside of rebels' control, something must be done in that part, and something urgent needs to be done. It will serve in both ways. First, it will alleviate the humanitarian situation. If there is more danger, for example, let's assume that the military, it's not assume, it's already there. There is confrontation still ongoing in other areas. For example, Houthis are attacking Hajur, and they may attack in other areas as well. So if there is other people displaced, we should have in the country zones which are equipped to meet them and to receive, to meet their needs and to receive them. Second, if you set up a successful model which is in your hand, and you now create a framework agreed between the international community, the Arab coalition, and the Yemeni government, that you need to start building this, that successful model could be convincing to people who are still under the control of Houthi areas to rebel against them and to aspire for the change that's happening around them. I think if we talk about the priority, I will say this is the priority.
Thank you very much. So it's about governance, basically, improving governance that will create the seeds for development. The problem is chicken and egg problems. Can you develop, improve governance if you have no security? But we might talk about that in the Q&A. Dr. Damag, your first priority, what would you invest in for a prospect of feasible peace in Yemen?
I will build on what my colleague has said about the importance of having a successful model in the liberated areas. The international community must help the government to build this state, because having a state by itself is the only hope the Yemenis have. In addition to this, when we talk about aspects of the conflict, we call them the hidden aspects, the idea is not just to raise this issue, but to make a message to the international community who want to help Yemen to reach peace, is that pouring the international aid will not solve the problem, will not solve the humanitarian situation. You need to tackle the issue from its roots. You have to understand the complexity. And if you understand the complexity and all the different aspects, then you can put the appropriate pressure on different actors. Because if you don't do this, then you send the wrong message to others to follow the leads of violent groups and all these kind of things. And we keep hearing every day new groups forming, and they say we must follow what the Houthi has done, because they got the recognition from the international community. We hear this and we get worried, because we don't want for Houthis and what they have been doing to be a model for others to copy. And you mentioned about the already existed terrorist groups in Yemen, the Al-Qaeda and Daesh, and this is a future danger as well. And if we send wrong messages, they will get encouraged to represent themselves as counter to Houthis. So we need to apply pressure on the international community to try to understand the complexity of the Yemeni problem more, so that they can help in solving it.
Right, thank you very much. But as Mr. Qureshi said, the complexity of this conflict is very important. So even if maybe Yemenis still no longer understand the complexity of this conflict, it's really a very difficult task for sure. Madam Mashour, can you just provide us your priority for prospect for peace?
Yeah, very, very shortly. I think the international community must also make much more pressure on the Houthis to accept the peace. And it is not just the peace. They have to... which peace we are in need for? We are in need for a fair peace. We are in need for, that means they are militias, and they committed the coup, and they destroyed our dream to rebuild the country, to rebuild the civic state. state of right and order. That's what we need from the international community. We need from the UN, from the Security Council, to find a mechanism to apply their resolution. That is very important. And also to rely on what the Yemeni have agreed upon. The national dialogue outcomes, it is consensus. All Yemenis group, they were there. All Yemenis were represented in this. More than 600 representatives they were in the national dialogue. So that is our proposal, our roadmap for the country, for the future of the country. So they have to accept that. Now, also we need from them to disarm the Houthis. Now we are here, me, myself, we are the victims of this conflict. We left the country because our life under risk. I'm not speaking just about myself, but millions of Yemenis. They are in the diaspora. They are in Egypt. They are in Sudan. They are in Djibouti. They are in Somalia. They are everywhere in the world. Wherever they find shelter, wherever they find place they can stay in. Yeah, we are over all the world. So we need from the international committee to make much more pressure on all parties, especially on the Houthis, to go to the round table for the peace. That is very important for us. I'm speaking also as Yemeni citizen, as normal citizen, that we are in need in peace. But anyway, the international committee can support us, can help us in this regard. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I think we have now slightly less than half an hour for question and answer. Please ask short questions, no long comments, and introduce yourself so that we know who you are. We'll take 3 for questions, and then we will open a discussion for the panel.